Chapter 15, Ethics in Financial Management. So we're now going to start a new chapter here. This is going to be our ethics chapter. Following on from strategy, we need to start thinking about acting ethically. And you'll see here, this is a popular chapter here, especially regarding this, the HICPA's Code of Ethics. You can see here, it's been tested many times. We're going to go through in big detail one question, and then I'm going to leave you guys again to practice more questions on this area. Ethics is very popular, especially this Code of Ethics. And so, let's have a little look at what this HICPA code says. So what we've got here is there are some fundamental principles here of the HICPA's code, and you can see we've got integrity, objectivity, we've got professional competency and due care. Now notice, because this is a code for accountants, they talk about in each one, look, a professional accountant, you can see professional accountants. Now, something that we need to understand at this early stage, in chapter 14, this is in our regulatory environment, we see that directors and managers, they have a duty to act ethical as well. So what we need to be aware of here is that in module 12, it's not only professional accountants working in business, but also our directors and managers. Now, they don't have to follow the HICPA's code, but of course they have to act ethical, so it still means they need integrity, they need to consider objectivity, so they have to also observe and comply with, well, any code of ethics. This is HICPA's code of ethics. This is a good code. So this is a good example as to what directors should be doing in Hong Kong. Yeah, so not directly, they have to follow it, but of course in chapter 14, as I mentioned, directors and managers have a duty to act ethical. And so the same code here, we could apply it to the directors and the managers. Now, when you get this in your actual exam, it's not scoring marks for just writing out what the code says, it's for the application of the actual code. So what you're trying to do in the exam is you're trying to identify, this is ethical issues, is what you're trying to do. So try and identify ethical issues. What do I mean by ethical issues? Well, let's have a little look at the first code. This one says professional accountants, or in other words, directors and managers, they should be acting straightforward, honest and fair in their professional and business relationships. Well, what that means is we're looking for, in the scenario where maybe a director, a manager, or it could be a professional accountant, they are not being straightforward. They're trying to hide something. In other words, they are being dishonest and they are being unfair. If a director, a manager, or an accountant's doing that, it's an integrity problem. Yeah, they are not acting ethical. Objectivity, again, professional accountants, but the same could be said for directors and managers. They should not allow bias, they should not allow conflicts of interest to influence others. Now, what we're going to see is we're going to see a number of threats here to this actual code. So for module 12, that is professional accountants, again, working in business. It's the same with the directors and managers as well. There's actually a very broad range of threats to those fundamental principles. So one which is very popular in this actual exam is, for instance, here, self-interest. So integrity and also objectivity, a bias or a conflict, this can arise where the behavior is being influenced by a financial interest. So if they own shares, or if they're receiving some kind of financial reward or other interest, not only them but a close family member, they've got to be careful about that influence. Their objectivity could be affected. So they've got to be fair, they've got to be honest, they should avoid these conflicts and bias, therefore. We've also got professional competency and due care. Again, all these talk about professional accountants, but again, we can apply this to the directors and the managers. They should act diligently in accordance with applicable technical and professional standards. So if we're aware of an issue, we need to investigate further. So if a director was aware of a problem, we should investigate. We have a duty, remember, to the shareholders. The shareholders are the owners of the business. So we have this ethical duty to act. If we don't act, we are not being careful. So look, you can see why it's called due care, because we need to act diligently. If we're aware of a problem, we need to investigate. Confidentiality talks about confidential information acquired should not be disclosed to any third parties without proper and specific authority. And professional behaviour, this one says professional accountants, the same also with directors and managers. They, of course, should comply with the relevant laws and regulations and avoid action that discredits the profession. Now, I'm sometimes asked by students, what is the difference here between our professional behaviour and our professional competency? And really, it's to do with the seriousness of the issue. So if, let's say, a director or an accountant was aware of a problem and didn't investigate, then they get a slap on the wrist. Yeah, that's not good. That's naughty. Yeah, we should have been investigating. Next time, you need to investigate. So, okay, it's serious, but not as serious as this one. If we breach a law and regulation, we could commit an offence. Very serious. There could be legal action, there could be fines, penalties, big damage could be being done. So professional behaviour is very, very serious. And in Module 12, we do need to have a general awareness of laws and regulations. So I'm sure at some point in your studies, you've studied a little bit about, Hong Kong law. We're not going to go that deep into law here in Module 12, but I have got a page. It's in the second video a little bit later, where I give you guys a broad range of safeguards, laws. We do talk in chapter 14 a little bit later on about the company's ordinance, and again more about the duties of directors. We talk about things like corporate governance later on as well. So we do talk more about this one. But this code, very, very popular. And not only this self-interest threat as well, there can be many other problems that we can experience as well. So we've got to be aware of all of these things as well. So things like intimidation or pressure. So an account could be deterred or threatened or forced to act in a certain way. There could be inducements, so things like gifts or hospitality. This could threaten things like integrity, objectivity, professional behaviour. When we prepare information, we want to make sure that information is fair, honest, prepared objectively with due care in accordance with professional standards. We've got to act with sufficient expertise, so we should only undertake this as significant tasks for what we've had specific training for, knowledge or skills. And laws and regulations, we need to ensure that always our work, our advice, always complies with relevant laws and regulations. So that is some of the common ones, the more popular ones that we start to see in our ethical issues. Let's now start getting into some question practice. And I think one of the best questions that we've got on this is this style of question here, where they're asking you about ethical and legal issues. Let's have a little look here at this question. This is, again, what I've done is I've extracted the information. This is from the 2021 pilot exam. Let's have a look here what this company is doing. So We've got a company here called FS Logistics. We can refer to them as FS. And they are listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Now, when we list the company, we need to be aware of all the regulatory issues that we have. So when we get into chapter 14, we're going to be talking much more about the regulatory environment of listed companies. Yeah, we're going to be talking about things like the Companies Ordinance. We're going to be talking about corporate governance. The directors, of course, have responsibilities. They've got to act in the best interests of the stakeholders, the shareholders of the listed company, ethical duties, legal duty. They can't break the law. All those things we're going to be talking about in chapter 14. So, okay, we've seen the scenario before. It's a company that's providing logistics and delivery services in Hong Kong and China. Fine. Let's have a look at what they're asking us here to do. So it says, explain the professional ethics and, so hold on, let's break this up. So we've got professional ethics, that's going to be 1. And it says here, legal issues. So we're going to break this up 2. It says, of Mr. Young regarding, it says, the loss of customer data incident. And so they've done this several times, ethics and legal issues. So they tend to be larger questions here. This is now for 8 marks. But there's lots of things that we can discuss, lots of things that we can give. As we start reading through this, we need to start thinking about some of the laws that we are going to be coming across. We've already covered some laws. There's more to come in chapter 14. But let's have a little read now. Let's see what's gone on. So it says here, this company's operated in Hong Kong, China for 20 years. FS, it says, has kept all its business data in a centralized data warehouse located in Hong Kong, and it's managed by an information systems team headed by a chief information officer, Mr. Young. It says, who graduated from a reputable university. So, what we've got here now is this is a Chief Information Officer, a CIO. So what we start to talk about in chapter 14 is the Board of Directors. And you have directors responsible for certain things. You will have the CFO. They are in charge of the financing. Here we've got a CIO. So this would be the director. Or I should put direct, not directors, because I've been talking about the board of directors. This would be the director who is responsible. This is for the information systems. So on our board of directors, we have different directors responsible for different things. So this guy would be responsible for the information systems. Fine. Let's carry on reading what happened. It says he graduated from a reputable university, that's fine. He is a fellow member, it says here, of the Hong Kong Certified Public Accountants. So straight away, when they give you a certified public accountant, we need to start thinking about specifically HKICPAs. But they don't have to be an accountant. Like I said, the directors on the board have this ethical duty that we're going to be talking about in chapter 14. It says he's experienced, he's a qualified information systems professional, so you can see why they've made him responsible. So a few months ago, Mr. Young was aware of increased hacking activities in the information systems, which contains all the customers, vendors, and financial information of FS. So hold on, he's aware of some hacking incidents that's been happening here. Let's start thinking back to some of the IT laws. So if you remember back here, this was back in chapter 1, information systems. We did talk about some of the laws just here. So we talked about the technology laws, and there was that personal data privacy that talks about the security of data. We need to keep it secure. And obviously, if people are hacking, is it secure? If people can get in and start stealing the data. Let's carry on reading. It says, some hackers have successfully broken into the information system a few times. So this is not the first time. This guy's aware, and they broke in a few times. It says, but they didn't take away any data or cause any damage. Well, that doesn't matter. The fact is, it's not secure. If they're breaking in the first time it happens, why have they done it again? Why has it been allowed to be done again? Here's that Mr. Young again. Look, it says, Mr. Young did not report the security issue to the board of directors. So we're going to be talking about the board of directors. We're going to be talking about the risk committee. That's going to be later when we get into our chapter 14. So we're going to talk much more about the board responsibilities due to the board later on. But let's stop just there. Straight away, there's a big problem here, therefore. So first of all, he was aware of the hacking, but he's not done anything about it. So that would be not acting diligently. So that would be our professional competency and due care. He was aware of a problem, but did nothing about it. So professional competency, and that would be due care. We could be using that one to discuss. Also, if he's not reporting this, he's not keeping the data secure. Remember that this would be his responsibilities. He's got to ensure, as a CIO, that the data is secure. So that is a breach of that data ordinance. So that would be more serious. That would be that professional behavior one that we saw earlier on. So he's breaching that one. So actually what he's done here is he's committed an offence, because that is an ordinance, that is a law. So he's committed an offence here by not reporting it and escalating it up to the senior board and the risk management committee. Why has he not been doing that? Let's have a little look. It says because he wants to avoid an impact to his bonus. So you can see this is affecting his integrity. He's not being honest, he's not reporting it, he's hiding it, is what he's trying to do. So this would be integrity, we could be discussing just here. And also, you can see it's a bonus, it's a self-interest, so it's affecting what he's doing. So this is a bias, it's creating a conflict. So we could be talking here about this self-interest threat affecting here integrity and objectivity. Let's carry on finishing off what else. So we got 1, 2, 3, this is code of ethics. It says, during the recent information systems audit, Mr. Young was surprised to find that the personal information of 100,000 customers had been hacked by hackers a month ago. So he thought initially that nothing was taken, but actually things are being taken now. It says it's the first time Mr. Young has had to face such a huge loss of company data. So what has he done? It says, after seeking advice from a friend who's a professional information systems consultant. Well, hold on. He now has just told somebody outside of the company, not the board of directors, not the internal directors. He's told somebody externally about the loss of data. So that would be a confidentiality problem. So he shouldn't be telling people outside of the business. This is a confidential nature for the board of directors. Why isn't he telling them? Why is he telling a friend? So in other words here, we've got all 5 codes of ethics. But in your actual exam, don't always expect all 5. Yeah, maybe there could be 4 out of 5, maybe not all 5. So don't try and think, oh, I need all 5. Just write, giving evidence from the scenario. And if you want to write a little bit more, let's think roughly about how much we should be writing just here. So for the first part, if you roughly divide this up, it's going to be roughly somewhere like about 4 marks here for the ethics part, and then roughly something like about 4 marks here for the legal issues part. To write more, first we'll introduce what the code says, and then you can then explain the issue, what's happened. So look, you can see first of all, I'm writing way too much than what's required just here. This is what you can do. Let's introduce first of all the fact that he is a CPA. So Mr. Young will be subject to the fundamental principles of the Code of Ethics of Hong Kong. Even if they're not CPA, like I said, the directors still have this ethical duty, and of course the ethical duties would be the same fundamental principles, the same ethics. Let's then start introducing here integrity. This one says professional accounts like Mr. Young, they should be straightforward, honest and fair in their professional relationships, and then give the issue here. So however, for self-interest to avoid an impact to his bonus, Mr. Young has not reported the intrusion of hackers. So what he's trying to do is hide this. He's being dishonest, is misleading his behavior, and what this is doing is compromising his integrity. Next, objectivity. Again, this is Mr. Young. He should be acting here without bias, without conflict of interest or undue influence. Say what's gone on. So Mr. Young's objectivity is being compromised because again he's acting in his own personal self-interest rather than thinking about the stakeholders' interests. He's decided not to disclose the incident to the board of directors and the risk management committee. So just keep on writing. Use the names of the people here in the scenario. So you can see I keep on talking about Mr. Young, Mr. Young, Mr. Young. I'm also talking here about FS. So we need to be using that throughout our answer. And then make sure that you're talking here about all of the codes. So as I'm going down here, I'm explaining. Maybe writing this is too much. You can see, look, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's way enough to get some good marks on this section. What's maybe a little bit more tricky, because you haven't yet looked at our chapter 14 and chapter 16s yet, is the legal issues. But won't hurt us now to start thinking about some of these legal issues now. Let's put another little heading up. And we have seen back in this was our chapter 1, we did look at that personal data privacy ordinance. And what this one does, this makes an offence if personal data collected, processed, retained and stored is not conducted in an adequately secure manner. So it's that security that is not being protected in this actual case. Let's give the example what's gone on. So Mr. Young, remember he was the CIO. He was aware of hacking activities, but what he's done is failed to report the data loss incident. He's the one which will be responsible. So what he's done here, he would have committed an offence because he is not ensuring FS's personal data security. Also, not only here the personal data ordinance, we're going to be looking later on at the corporate governance listing rules. So we've been looking at governance issues and regulatory issues. This is all going to be in chapter 16 and chapter 14. And so he's also breached the company's ordinance because what these require is they require directors to carry out their duties and act faithfully and professionally. This is in the best interest of the stakeholders of the company. So because Mr. Young here is acted unethically, this is for his own self-interest. He's not reported the data security incident. So he has not been carrying out his duties, acting faithfully and professionally. And we can also say, therefore, that he would have committed an offence under the company's ordinance. This has been forced by the courts and violating corporate governance. This one we're going to see disciplinary action by the Stock Exchange of Hong Kong. So we will be looking at these areas later. Like I said here, we can't cover everything in these early chapters, but when we've covered all these in chapter 16, chapter 14, you will then see we're going to get into some detail into sort of these legal issues that we've got down just there. Now, I haven't put professional behaviour in here because I want to talk about the legal issues separately, because of course when you breach the laws and regulations, it's professional behaviour. So I've stuck this in here, but if you want to put it in earlier in the ethics part, you could have done. If you want to put that back into the first part, you can do that if you want to. I've said here, look, because he's not followed the personal data ordinance, there's the company's ordinance as well. So he's committed all these offences, therefore, so it means that he's not been complying with the laws and the regulations. Something like that, you can see here for the legal issues, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That should be more than enough to be scoring that 8 out of 8. We need to spot the ethical issues. We need to give some appropriate applied advice using the scenario, identifying those ethical issues. What I want you guys to do is practice this area. So I've got a few questions now that I've stuck into your set of notes. Let's just have a brief look at each one of these ones, and then I want you guys to practice. So let's have a look at another one where they asked about legal and ethical issues. So this is another good question here. I've extracted it. It's a recent one here. This is from June 2019. Let's have a little look here what they was asking us to do. So if we go down to the requirements, we again had to explain this was the legal and the ethical issues related to John's proposal with Peter. And so there's a number of things here that we need to do. There's legal, there's ethical, and it says advise whether they should accept the business practice and follow up actions. So at the end, once you've gone through the problems, should it be accepted? Of course, not normally when you get these questions. It should be rejected. But what should be rejected? Let's have a little look. Peter, who's Peter? Well, I want you guys to have a read of the whole scenario, but what this is about is bribery. We've got this guy here called Peter Zhang of the listed company, and it says he's proposed to offer Peter and his family members some monetary incentives and a luxury business trip to Japan. By doing so, John hopes that Peter will help him to rent the store at a lower price. Well, this is bribery. So again, we haven't covered bribery. If you just turn a little later into your set of notes, just turn here, this is to page 15-9. And if you turn here to page 15-9, what I've got here, it's not possible to list every law and regulation, but I've got some of these safeguards here, and you will see we've got a range of professional, legal and regulatory frameworks. So for instance, the ICAC, they aim to minimize corruption, or sometimes called graft and bribery, enhance business standards and create a level playing field for business in Hong Kong. And then here's now our bribery. There's an ordinance, there's a law, and that's the Prevention of the Bribery Ordinance. It's an offence to offer or accept significant values of money or gifts with the intention and timing to influence the judgment or conduct of a person. So these things are not in our syllabus. They are things that the HICPA expect that you guys already know and understand. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I've put them into my set of notes. There are more laws and regulations, a lot more in chapter 14. Look, so you can see it's there. We've got things like the Companies Ordinance, chapter 14. There's the SFO, SFC 14. There's a code of conduct as well. There's the corporate governance as well. And all of these things here, what these first set are trying to do is protect the interests of shareholders, investors, and market intermediaries. And there's more laws. We saw in chapter 1, we've got those cybersecurity IT laws. They're protecting personal data information systems. We need to be aware in Hong Kong, of course, there's health and safety employment laws protecting the interests of employees. There's environmental laws protecting the environment and society. There's consumer protection laws protecting customers. There are many, many different types of laws and regulations. Like I said in module 12, it's not possible to go all the way through all these laws. So again, just try to give some practical advice. We don't need to know all the ins and the outs, but it should be obvious in the scenario that offences are being committed. So we'll talk more about those safeguards in the part 2 video to our ethics. I want you first of all to practice that question. It's not only got legal issues in it, it's also got ethical issues as well. So look, you've got my solutions, but don't just read the question and then read the answer. I want you to have a little practice first and a little think first. So that's another good question there, looking at the ethics and the legal issues. Then we had a very different style of question. So again, what I've done is extracted this one. This is from June 2022. And again, what I want you guys to do is practice. Now, up to June 2022, all the questions we'd had previously, there was ethical issues in the scenario. And in this question here, there wasn't ethical issues. So what was happening? What was going on? Well, what they'd done is they'd linked this scenario into an acquisition. So it said here that the group is planning for an acquisition of another company here called Blue Sky Limited, BSL. We'll talk more in chapter 11 about acquisitions. And what we find out is this. If we just turn across over the next page, you find this out. It says, one of the key reasons why the group would like to acquire BSL is that one of the managing directors and also a key shareholder of BSL, so there's a conflict here, is the father-in-law of the executive director, Peter Lee, of the group. So there could be maybe some intimidation here if we've got some relationships here, if there's a possible conflict. And what they was wanting you to do in the requirement, it was for 7 marks, and they want you to determine still the ethical issues, but what they want you to do is give examples, what we have to consider in the acquisition of BSL. So there wasn't actually an issue. You had to say, well, what could go wrong? What could be the problem here? And so this was a professional accountant. So if we're a CPA, then of course we need to follow the code. Principle of integrity says that financial controller should be straightforward, honest, and then give some examples. So look, you can see here, what I'm doing is I'm giving examples. So the new financial controller may compromise their integrity if they're intimidated by Peter to provide a recommendation to acquire the company which benefits Peter's father-in-law. Remember, he's the managing director and a major shareholder of BSL. So I don't want to go through all that and read through it, as I said, because you won't learn anything. I want you to have a read of the whole scenario again and practice. Have a little think about what could be here the ethical issues. Now, we did have, again, a very recent question here. It was in that December 2022 exam that was poorly answered. So I just want to have a little look through this one before we move on. because this was the exam where we had that very, very low 16% pass rate. And students used Code of Ethics, but they didn't get the perspective correct. Let's have a little look here. We are very, very familiar again with the scenario. We've seen now the scenario many, many times. It's that restaurant where we had that pandemic, that COVID-19, and here's now what's going on. It says, due to the adverse impact of the pandemic, the government has provided additional subsidies to the catering industry. These are subject, it says, to independent review by the external auditors and the government. And it says the amount of government subsidy is calculated based on the size of the restaurant, a number of full-time employees employed by each restaurant. So it says, since SRG has employed a large number of part-time employees, one of the directors proposes counting part-time as full-time to obtain subsidies from the government. This will help improve cash flow of the restaurants immediately. So you can see the problem. The problem is, this is based on the number of full-time employees. And what one of the director is proposing to do here is count part-time as full-time. Well, of course, that is going to be acting illegally, trying to obtain money. Now, what they were asking you about just here was, it says acting as CFO of SRG. So many students talked about from the director, this director's point of view, not the CFO. What we had to do here was identify the ethical issues and propose a response to the suggestion that's being proposed by that director. So we're not proposing it, another director is proposing it. So you can see that here, same as before, what we're going to be doing. Let's first of all start going through our ethical issues. So this would have been introduced in the fact that if we are a CFO, the CFO of course will be a CPA. So again, we've got the code of ethics here, and then I start then going through the ethical issues, integrity. We've got that professional behavior. As I said, don't expect always all of the codes will apply here. But what we can do is talk about the ethical issues, and at the end, what we need to then do is we need to propose a response. Well, of course, this should not be allowed. So here, the director's proposal should be rejected. It does not classify part-time as full-time when it applies for the government subsidies. So what we had here was problems. Because although students correctly used the code of ethics, they got the perspective wrong. Many candidates, so not a few, but many candidates answered from the perspective of the director rather than the CFO. So we've said it many, many times here. We need to look very, very carefully at the questions before answering. This was not answered satisfactorily. So they did say, look, you can see here, this was acting as CFO of SRG. So we've got to be very, very careful, read the question very carefully, make sure you're answering this from the correct perspective. Yeah, so I'm going to leave you guys with those questions there that I want you to practice. I think before we move on to the next part in our chapter 15, this is going to be thinking about the conflict between ethics and strategy. It's going to get a little bit heavy, the next part to the ethics chapter. So I think the best thing for us to do before we start getting into quite a heavy section here, looking at conflicts, let's take a short little break. Please practice these questions. Don't just leave them. don't read the question, don't read the answer. Have a go first, then you can read the answer. Same here as well with this recent question. Have a little look at it. I've included it because we should have been answering from the CFO's perspective. I think the best thing to do, let's take a short little break, and then we're going to get into conflicts, and we're going to look at those safeguards as well, those solutions in our next part 2 video. So see you guys soon for that part. Keep practicing. See you soon. Bye.